All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jaehyun, your moderator today. I'm from Ignite Capital, a liquid fund doing a bunch of DeFi on-chain activities. We are here to discuss about interoperability. Would you guys please introduce yourselves in your project briefly?
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to be here. My name's Nikhil. I lead product at the Wormhole Foundation. Pushing forward various product and technical initiatives. Been working on Wormhole for almost 2 years now, so excited to chat here.
Hey, I'm Dominik. I'm the head of ecosystem at LI.FI. We're the leading bridge and DEX aggregator, aggregating over 20 different cross-chain bridges, 10 different liquidity sources, over 30 different chains, and we work with a lot of the big wallets and big DeFi protocols and power their cross-chain swaps and bridging, and we also have Jumper, which is our own front-end interface that does quite a bit of volume.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shawn. I'm the APAC lead for Interop Labs. So Interop Labs is the initial developer of Axelar network. So Axelar network is one of the leading interoperability protocols out there. Essentially, we power a lot of the bridges, cross-chain use cases across different ecosystems. So we support across Cosmos, EVM, and we're going to expand into other non-EVMs like XRPL, Solana, Suri, so on and so forth. Yep.
All right. I mean, it's quite interesting to see three big teams that we, as a liquid fund, always interact. I mean, we, as like DeFi yield farmers, always enter Wormhole, LI.FI, and Axelar. So it's quite interesting to actually ask the question that we are quite interested from the all our employees were interested. So I'll come up with three big topics, big open questions to start. So the first question is, as we look at the future of the blockchain interoperability, like token standards like mint and burn or like optimistic solving has emerged as key approaches for cross-chain transactions. How do you all see these token standards influence the future of blockchain interoperability? Can Nikhil start?
Yeah, sure. Good question. Excited to hear others' takes on this too. But yeah, I think these are two different mechanisms for transferring tokens cross-chain. Burn and mint is one mechanism, optimistic solving or intense or liquidity bridging, whatever you want to call it, is another mechanism. And I think the two mechanisms are not mutually exclusive. They can be very compatible and exist together. And in fact, it makes a lot of sense for them to exist together in a lot of cases, in my opinion. Depending on the kind of liquidity. So first, from the user perspective, I think mint and burn is always going to be the cheapest because it's more like a native asset transfer. So there's no additional cost that you're going to pay to like a market maker or a solver to facilitate that transaction and take on the risk of finality. So I think it's always going to be the cheapest, but it's not always going to be the fastest because it's subject to finality times on the source chain. Liquidity bridging is going to be the fastest, but it's also going to be a little bit more expensive. So you have two different user profiles there that both could solve, and both are valid user profiles. And then the second thing I'll say that before I hand it off to the others is I think that depending on the solver mechanism that you're using, it makes sense to have a native token transfer mechanism that solvers or other actors who are performing the optimistic performing the optimistic bridging, can use to rebalance assets pretty seamlessly. So like if you do the across model, for example, and you maintain liquidity pools on different chains, you're gonna have to rebalance somehow, and it could be a lot more efficient for you to rebalance via burn and mint mechanism rather than going through centralized exchanges if that's the only way that you can rebalance those tokens. So I think the two can work pretty well together. And we're going to continue to see them coexist going forward.
Yeah, I would say I generally agree. I think a lot of the intent-based narrative has been pushed, or the account abstraction narrative, whatever you want to call it, was built on top of that, has been pushed in terms of just like new companies being built in that, and obviously they have an interest in pushing that narrative forward. And that doesn't mean that is not valuable. It totally is. But yeah, that alone can probably not solve the problem, right? And that's what we've seen, for example, since recently we added Stargate's V2 version with Hydra, which does, you know, DOFTs and is based on wrapped assets, basically in a burn and mint mechanism. And them doing that has generally compressed the fees that bridges can take in that space by a lot, right? Before that, we were seeing Stargate V1 taking like 5 to 6 basis points, across taking 5 to 6 basis points. And obviously there were more like unique routes, for example, like Cosmos to EVM or Solana to EVM, where the competition wasn't as big, so there was more space to take higher fees. But at least in the EVM space, since that happened, fees have compressed to like 1 to 2 basis points, which is good generally for the users, but it also bears the question, can these solvers actually be profitable? Is 1 or 2 basis points of solving enough to make them profitable? And then on the other hand, if we look at the actual mechanisms that run these auctions right now, they're usually time-based auctions, which means basically you come into like kind of an MEV situation where the solvers on the destination chain have to basically upbid each other as to who fills that transaction, which leads to the same kind of negative externalities or bad game theory that we used to have in Ethereum before we had flashbots, and which compresses their margins even further, right? So in that sense, I think burn and mint can be a good alternative for a lot of things where you don't run into those conditions, and you actually set up the ecosystem in a way that can make the solving even profitable. And as you said, the rebalancing needs to be there so we can have that and make that happen.
Yeah, I think I just want to add a couple more points on top of what Nikhil and Dom has shared. Is that in the first place, as mentioned earlier, a few very big buzzwords that have been popping up along crypto Twitter. It's, you know, chain abstraction, about intent solving. As mentioned by Dom, you know, it's very VC driven narratives, right? But if you look at the underlying thing that we are trying to solve here, is user experience for a lot of people that are going on chain, right? So the whole chain abstraction topic here, it's the core of what interoperability is trying to solve from day one. Because if you look at Axelar, the founders of Axelar, Sergey and Yorgos, they came, you know, they were the founding members and the founding engineers for Algorand many years ago, and they realized that when developers starting to go from different ecosystems, and if you look at just recently Electric Capital's report, 1 out of 6 developers are building across different chains, right? So you will see more and more multi-chain type of future building cross-chain applications, right? So, but the thing is that right now, if you look at some of the cross-chain applications, then also the user experience for a lot of these applications just becomes very problematic. So how we actually help for Axelar is to kind of simplify a lot of the back-end infrastructure to kind of make available what we call as general message passing. So coming back to the topic about intents and solving, it's more or less very similar type of you know, concept that we are talking about. I'm not going to deep dive into that. Is that essentially you need to look at it in 2 different levels. One is the application level. One is the other one will be the app infrastructure protocol level, right? So essentially, Axelar, Wormhole, Ledger, Chainlink CCIP, IBC, these are what we call the message passing layers, right? And on top of that, you have the token standards, your intent solver markets, you have your queries that Wormhole offers. You know, all the different services are built on top of all this message passing layer, right? So you need to first differentiate that front, where you will still need the actual settlement at the end of the day. And coming back to the point is that how I see the market kind of evolves. I think Jaehyun and I came, I don't know, maybe Jaehyun don't want to kind of reveal his age, but you know, probably I'm a bit older. I spent some time in TradFi when we saw a lot of the high frequency traders, right? The evolution of market structure would drive a lot of the market economics that, you know, Dom was saying just now, right? Solvers are not profitable today, right? And if you look at the barrier of entry for a lot of the market makers, we are talking about, you know, what's the cost of capital here to deploy onto this few solvers, right? And also the infrastructure. A lot of these things are happening off-chain. The scalability of all these off-chain solvers need a lot of capital to actually deploy those. So from that perspective, you need to understand that market evolution over time, where money can be made, definitely there will be more investments and teams will be more innovating. But right now, where the market is still really very nascent and very early days, on-chain volume is not massive, right? It's raced down to the bottom, in my opinion, for now.
Yeah, I think just one more thing I'd want to add on top of what Shawn and Dom said is that I like how Shawn structured the stack from messaging at the bottom layer to token transfer frameworks, and then more applications built on top of those token transfer frameworks. And kind of the way that I see the stack when it comes to mint and burn mechanisms and intents mechanisms is, again, at the bottom you have the general message passing layer, so Wormhole, Axelar, any other kind of interoperability layer. And then on top of that you have the token transfer framework that's used. So that could be, Axelar ITS or Wormhole native token transfers or layer 0 OFT. And then that's kind of like the fundamental way that you transfer tokens cross-chain. And then on top of that, I see intents and liquidity bridging protocols as kind of like a user experience multiplier, like something that just makes the user experience better because they can do it faster. But as Dom and Shawn are saying, that's still a new space. There are a lot of problems with that. And at the fundamental level, I think mint and burn sits like lower in the stack at the fundamental level.
I can maybe also from our perspective as an aggregator add one more thing here. We strongly believe that like the time of these token standards is coming, and that like we've seen it recently. Like there was a lot of announcements. You guys just built the bridge for staked ETH. Layer 0 just announced the bridge for Rep BTC. There's all these big assets that have very high market caps going multi-chain now. And from our perspective, the biggest issue is like if we think about that, if we aggregate a bridge, then we usually can just aggregate that bridge and the assets that it has, and it's just one integration. With these token standards, it's not so easy because every token itself is basically its own bridge, in a sense. And some of these token standards allow for certain amounts of customization, and so you get into a situation where you basically have to build another aggregator that now aggregates all these token standards so we can use them in our routing, because as we just established, they are technically the cheapest way to bridge tokens. So for anybody that wants to bridge high volume, like for example a liquid fund, you probably don't want to pay like, $2,000 on $100,000 transfers because you have the slippage from the solver, the slippage from the liquidity pool. So, but you want to get the cheapest, fastest route and the most complex routing, and that for somebody like us, that means we have to now integrate hundreds of bridges instead of just 10. So we're still kind of in the early innings of the complexity of what this world of 1,000 chains and this world of 1,000, because every chain that we add and every asset that we add adds more permutations into our routing, makes our routing more complex in the back end, makes us having to do more computation. And something else that we talked about earlier is that the clients that we have, they expect us to have very fast APIs. So now you run into a problem where you're trying to build a fast API while at the same time your routing becomes more and more complex, which is kind of like, it's a catch-22 in a sense.
All right, thank you for your amazing intels. I think you already covered like some of the topics I wrote, so I'll just move on to a new one. So as Dom mentioned, like liquid funds like us always keen to find like the best route, like the most cheapest way, and when it comes to bridging or like or interacting with different bridges and stuff like that. So and I think we always look for new type of chain abstractions to come out so that you will make our simplify our interactions to multiple chains. So my question is, what new types of chain abstraction in terms of interoperability do you think users will want to expect going forward? Can Shawn start answering?
Yeah, no problem. So I think it's about one of our core ecosystem app within Axelar is Squid. So Squid is integrated with like Li.FI and a few of the major wallets out there. Essentially, it's a one-click swap, right? And on top of the one-click swap, they are able to kind of compose on top of other contract calls. So I'm not too sure how many developers and builders within this room itself. So essentially, you can do like one-click swap into an NFT. You can use, like, for example, you want to buy a Pudgy Penguin on Ethereum, but can use your Solana to buy that Pudgy Penguin without, swapping through multiple routes, then thereafter go into your Ethereum wallet. So everything can be done within a few clicks in one interface without moving through different hoops there. The other one is like staking, right? This is one of the biggest actions out there for any on-chain users. You don't want to leave your assets lying around kind of idle without getting some yield. So like Squid kind of enables that one-click stake type of environment where, any staking protocol can just create that experience just from their front end. And that kind of helps with the API, widget, and SDKs that they enable. On top of that, what on the Axelar side is we have developer tooling, what we call as Interchain Token Service Portal, right? So for any meme coins, inspiration out there that you guys want to launch, go and check out Interchain Token Service Portal. With just a few clicks, you can launch it onto 14, 15 different EVMs, and you're able to kind of create from day one mint and burn capability across the different chains itself. So I think those are some of the things that we kind of help with the interoperability side of things and chain abstraction. Love to hear from other participants.
Yeah, I think that all goes into kind of like the, zapping and like those types of functionalities, which obviously we've had also for a long time built on, multiple bridging and same chain protocols that can do those kind of things. We're just mainly just batching, composing, these types of actions. I think like what everybody's talking about now is kind of like, I think the biggest things right now are gas abstraction probably, and then RPC abstraction. So like just generally making your building your transactions in a way that users don't have to switch between individual chains anymore. I think an early pioneer of like doing stuff like that was Avocado Wallet. They showed you can basically just have a USDC gas tank on one chain, and then you can execute transactions on all the connected chains and kind of abstract that away. I definitely think that's interesting, and obviously there's a lot of hype around it, and the concept of chain abstraction and one balance and stuff like that. Personally, for the whole balance abstraction stuff, I think it might be a little bit too early, because not necessary to building that stuff, but like I don't know how big the use cases are yet. But abstracting the gas away and abstracting the chain switching away, that's probably going to be the next step. We've seen a decent amount of interest from bigger players in the market for that. But also these players move slow, right? That's the thing with our narratives in crypto. We get really ahead of ourselves by being like, oh, this is the new world. This is what everything's going to look like in 6 months. And then you have some of the product teams in big wallets like MetaMask. They make decisions on like a 6-month time frame, right? So they make the decision maybe in 6 months, and then in another 6 months they might launch it. So I think it's good that we're building that stuff, but I don't think the whole world will change tomorrow. It will be another year or two until that actually materializes. So what we're doing is we're looking at all these narratives. We will integrate some, for example, like gas abstraction. That's something that we're working on right now, that we will be launching soon. And then, depending on demand from our integration partners and what we think makes sense for ourselves on Jumper, we will launch these things. But we're not super rushing into that right now.
Yeah, I think I like that take from Dom on just there's this tension between moving fast and slow in the industry. that's not talked about as much is like it's super easy to build anything in crypto and launch something, but then the big players take a long time to adopt it. And then when the big players do start to adopt it, that's really when you start to see consolidation across the industry. And I think that's one thing that we will see with chain abstraction, and that's one thing we will also probably see with intense protocols going in the next 6 months or so. And that's something that, as Dom also mentioned earlier, that we are currently seeing with the token standards or the token frameworks like Wormhole native token transfers, Axelar ITS, OFT. You have these major token issuers who are now adopting these token transfer frameworks. And we had a ton of smaller teams and smaller projects, smaller market cap tokens adopt these frameworks. But now you have Lido adopting it. You have BitGo adopting. You have Threshold BTC adopting. You have like all these massive teams adopting these frameworks. You have institutional teams starting to adopt these frameworks, and that's when you start to see a lot of consolidation, just generally in the space. But for your question on chain abstraction, I think chain abstraction is a hot topic, as Dom and Shawn have also said. It's still being developed. I think it's still pretty early. I think people are still developing towards like a vision of the future. And I think that's an interest, like the vision of interoperability, where does the UI for interoperability go is very tied into this chain abstraction question. And the way I think about interoperability UI in the future is definitely chain abstraction related. Like, I mean, you should be able to perform. When I think about interoperability UI in the future, the vision I have is that it should all be action-based. It should all be intent-based. You're on a DEX, you're on a NFT exchange, you're on any kind of dApp, and you say, I want to do this action, and you might have balances spread out across different chains, and it should be completely seamless for you to like send money to be able to take that action, whether it's swap or buy an NFT or do something else on chain. It should be completely completely abstracted away, completely seamless for you to do that action. And whatever swaps are happening in the background are just kind of happening in the background, being optimized for you based off of cost and time automatically. And so that's kind of the vision, high-level vision I have when it comes to the future of interoperability UI and how that relates to chain abstraction, but how that actually will be implemented is still very much under work and very early.
I think that's also, in some ways, that's just a general future of crypto, right? Like, it's basically we're trying to abstract all of this away for the end user while still retaining all the advantages of it, right? If we think about this, I mean, I've just spent some time in Asia, I've been in Korea, I've been here. You always, if you look at the world of the internet, you start running into these things where you have all these pockets of like applications, right? Like a lot of people here use Grab, a lot of people, in Korea use Kakao or other applications, or Line, or the Europeans were used to using Uber or other things. The problem is that none of these applications are composable with each other, right? So as soon as I kind of go to, and this is maybe actually a problem that our industry is acutely aware of because we travel so much, so we actually see these problems in reality, right? I was just in Korea and my credit card's not working because like their credit card system is not connected to my credit card system. And so basically what we're trying to do here is with the future of interoperability and all those things that we're doing, because the blockchains themselves are just going to be the back ends of applications, right? We're already seeing that. Embedded wallets, smart wallets, they allow everybody, and then become services, basically becoming commodities. They allow everybody to launch their application as an app in the app store, whatever, but it's still crypto-based. And then you get to a level of application where you can use the assets, the data, the value, and you can transfer that between those different applications, and that's what we're trying to do, is basically build the rails. We're building the routing rails, these guys building more the actual, transfer rails for this kind of thing. So, yeah, at the end of the day, the future of chain abstraction is the future of the internet, but it's much bigger than just the interoperability part of it. Is what we've built this technology for and what we can do with it once we have achieved that, and hopefully, that's going to make a better world. And if you look like at BlackRock and others who talk about tokenization now, then the big players in this world are starting to see that there's actually tangential benefits in using these kinds of things and building something that's much cheaper, much more secure, and much more scalable.
Yeah, I think Dom kind of brought up a great point when he mentioned the name BlackRock. So out here in Asia, I'm leading an initiative with Deutsche Bank. So this is a public news where we're part of the MES Project Guardian. So we're working very closely with Deutsche Bank and a couple of the large financial institutions to actually build an interoperable network using public permission blockchains. Right, so you cannot think of interoperability just between a lot of the public permissionless chains, right? There would be a world where a lot of these financial institutions are thinking about, what's the end state, right? Right now, I'm not too sure about the mix in the crowd is that, some of them are still operating in very, very kind of walled garden silos in hyperledgers, meaning like private ledgers, right, that are not scalable and not interactable. You cannot interact with the public permissionless space, right? But they also see the value that the public permissionless space is delivering to the traditional space, right? That's why I think BlackRock has kind of worked and invested in Securitize to actually deploy a public permissionless builder version on the Ethereum chain, right? But what we are seeing down the road is that there will be a convergence and broad mass adoption should come in with, mixing of both the innovations that is delivered by the Web3 ecosystem and also working with existing players like you mentioned, like Grab, Uber, the super apps of the world, right? So, at Axelar, what we think of as interoperability protocol is that how can we power the next generation of super apps, right? Being that interweaving protocol, like how right now today, when you open your application, your email application, you don't really know what protocol are you interacting with. Is it SMTP? Is it HTTP? So on and so forth, right? I'm not an engineer, so probably you guys know it better. So the whole idea here is to simplify things, get it easy to use. Then at the back end is that I think something that we have yet to really discuss amongst the panel is also the security assumptions, the speed assumptions, right? The finality of different transactions, right? The immutability of the different transaction models or the messaging passing models that different infrastructure layers are on the stage today or of this, not here today, right?
All right. The next question that I would like to raise is, how close do you guys all think that we're close to full chain abstraction, if that's the right wording, and what innovations do you think are needed to get to that point? Can Dom start this time?
Yeah, I mean, I already alluded to this a little bit before, right? Like, I mean, just think about it. When LI.FI is roughly like a 3.5 year old company, and when we started, we basically received a grant from Connext actually, because we were like, at a hackathon, we were like, we're gonna build a bridge aggregator. So we aggregated 2 bridges because those were the only bridges that existed. And they were wonky and they were connected to like 3 chains, right? And now we have like all these chains, all these bridges, all these different protocols. And I have a list of like 30 more, and then I just told you we're gonna have to integrate all these token standards, which is like another couple hundred. And you have all these features, right? But in some sense, a lot of these protocols and a lot of this technology has like barely made it over the like threshold of usability for somebody that's not willing to immensely suffer. Somebody that's like, doing this because they're a degenerate and they want to buy some token and they have to get to this new chain and they have to get this thing done because their financial incentive is great enough for them to do it. But the average user will never like, you know how a lot of you guys have like things on the internet and you have to do like 3 clicks and then there's like a little thing that you have to fill out and you don't have that information and then you just stop doing that because you're like, nah, I don't want to do this. So like every friction to the user process, you have a drop-off of like 20, 30, 50%. So from that perspective, and alluding to what I said earlier, I think we're still 2-3 years away from this being like fully, at the level where we would like it to be.
Yeah, I think I think that, yeah, 1 to 2 years away. It's hard to say. Like, I also think the user experience is not very smooth in crypto generally, and there's a lot of friction. I think that's why we're working so hard on shipping core protocol improvements. We're working so hard on launching things like intense protocols, on sort of growing the usage of standardized frameworks for transferring tokens via burn and mint. And so I think all these things are going to help with the user experience. They're going to help with standardization and consolidation across the industry. And then it'll be much easier to build applications on top of that. For me, it's really hard to say. I think that we're going to start seeing, I kind of stand by what I said earlier, which is that I think we're going to start seeing consolidation, when larger players start to adopt, which could be sometime in, the middle of next year or so, when larger players like MetaMask start to really adopt, or other large wallets start to really adopt some of these intense standards and cross-chain transfer standards, and then we'll probably see other players pop up. But I think it might be a little sooner than 2 to 3 years in that case. I think it might be like 1 to 2 years.
I think for me, my view is like, it's all driven by incentives, right? And if you look at developers right now, they are highly nomadic with the different ecosystems. And to be frank, like what are some of the core ecosystems that are very, very active today, right? So if you look at the Cosmos ecosystem, kind of have more or less seen a kind of a downward spiral. We haven't seen much new stuff that's coming through Cosmos side. I think Solana is picking up speed, the Move ecosystem has become some speed. Then there's this new narrative about alternate ETH killers, where you have high performance chain like Monads, the mega ETHs of the world that's coming out. So I think it all comes down to application centric, right? So the question is like, how would application builders want to build around their user experience? I think the tool sets are there today. It's up for the builder's imagination to think about how to utilize these tool sets, to be honest. If you are a builder, reach out to us, reach out to Wormhole, and speak to us like at the core infrastructure layer, what are some of the things that we can continue to build to kind of help that experience to the end user. But the thing is that right now it's very driven by incentives, where airdrop farmers, where Dom has mentioned, incentive to go through 100 hoops, would make you still want to make that $1,000 or $2,000 airdrop, right? Or even 10,000 airdrop, depending how generous they are, right? So from that perspective, it's largely incentive driven for the on-chain behavior for today. How can we start seeing more mass adoption, higher utility beyond just financial gains? Then from there, you would see more multi-chain requirements that's popping up.
Yeah, I think like adding to that also is this layer one narrative, this infrastructure narrative of VCs pumping money into it, and like even on bad stuff still making it 10x, 100x, whatever. Like it needs to end, and it will end, because like most of these chains now are layer 2s, and the margins on layer 2s are not like that. Like people have understood that like you cannot, we've seen that like there was many layer 2s funded, right? And the evaluations they were getting in the market were not as high as people would have liked them to be. And obviously there's still, a bunch of those big chains like Barrett Chain or Monad and others launching that are layer 1s. But I truly believe that that era of like launching new infrastructure chains is coming to an end. And that is actually a good thing, because that allows our industry to, as you said, focus on building actual applications instead of like hopping from one, grant and incentive program and, to the next, and just keep on repeating the same cycle over and over again. We've done that for quite some time. I think everybody that's been in the industry for longer is quite tired of it. And for the first time also the sentiment on Twitter is like really around like, right, we want to support applications, and people are willing to, support people who actually build applications. And as I said earlier, with embedded wallets and other stuff, there is cool stuff coming up where we're actually finally focusing on the right things.
Yeah, so I think just back to the point about developer engagement, and also at the end of the day, if you look at the funnel, you need builders to start having access to all this tooling, right? So what on Axelar side is that we recently just worked, Interop Labs worked with Open Zeppelin to kind of make a lot of the standardization for a lot of the EVM contracts to help utilize Axelar's GMP on the underlying contracts, where, if most of the EVM Solidity developers, they actually depend and also utilize a lot of the libraries of Open Zeppelin. So you can straight away use the Open Zeppelin libraries to actually deploy a lot of this standard smart contracts out there.
I think to wrap up, I'll just try to ask you my kind of personal question. So, I mean, when it comes to like scaling and minimizing trust, what do you see as the biggest challenge when it narrow down to token bridging and message passing? Can anyone just give a short answer for that?
Yeah, I think my short answer to that would be, I think it's good to have. So fundamentally, the people who build on top of interoperability platforms are developers. And it's good to give developers the flexibility to choose what kinds of sort of security parameters they want for their own use cases. And so I think modularity in the interoperability stack is going to be really important. And different approaches, there's no, I think, free lunch. Different approaches will have different trade-offs in terms of speed, in terms of security. There's going to be a really wide spectrum, and I think just adding modularity into the interoperability stack is gonna go a long way. And modularity in the stack kind of means, for example, you can plug ZK messaging in as more and more ZK-like clients start to come out. You can plug in other alternative kinds of verification systems. Like you can plug in custom verification if you want. You can plug in verification via an ABS if you want, or a restaking solution. Or you can continue to use like the Wormhole Guardians. You can use optimizations on existing verifier networks. So there's a lot of choice that I think we'll be able to provide to developers who want to build on top of interoperability solutions.
Yeah, I think like I basically agree with everything that you're saying, and I think on top of that, the other thing is there's something that we also discussed earlier is like we just need to give people the education of that actually, because like that modular stack means that you have to make choices as a developer, as as somebody, and we often have like clients coming to us and asking us, like as an aggregator and somebody who directly integrates with clients, like, hey, how should we build this stack? But at the end of the day, that's also not 100% our area of expertise, because like we build on top of that, right? So we have to make sure that people kind of understand the consequences of what they're doing, and some of them are good, some of them are questionable. Some of them are probably over-engineered, where you build a ton of security onto something that probably doesn't need that much security. And obviously, there's a trade-off between security and cost, right? The more security, the more, and speed, I guess, as well. Like the more additional verification I add into such a layer, the more I have to pay for that, and the slower it becomes. If that's maybe just a token that's getting traded around like high frequency and it's just like a gaming thing or whatever, then you probably don't need billions of dollars in security to secure that. But then if you do something like staked ETH, then these guys have taken the time, long time for everybody that's seen that in the forums, and talked to both these teams and actually use their solutions together, right? Because they're like, if something happens here, that's a catastrophic failure.
Yeah, I think just to look at the current landscape, I think you will need to understand what are some of the drivers of developer behavior today, right? I think a lot of which developers are, as I mentioned earlier, very nomadic, driven by grants, airdrop of the community, meaning like wherever a community is going for airdrops, they will build there, right? So you look at Blast, there was just a kind of surge of developer activity there, but once the TGE is done, people leave there, right? So from that perspective, what Axelar has kind of built around is like what Wormhole mentioned. Nikhil from Wormhole mentioned is modularity, where we have built a stack with amplifier, where you can build any type of verification method. Like you can look at RPC verification, you can look at ZK-like clients on top of the current existing security measures that Axelar already have. So we have one of the most highly decentralized set of validators, and we are a full blockchain itself, so we have 75 validators on top of that. So from a security assumption standpoint, you have kind of ironclad, right? So on top of that, you can then there customize what's the verified networks that you want to use. You want to use a subset, and on top of that is you can also select your deployment method. So ITS is one very cool way of looking at how can you, as a developer, develop on one chain and one-click deploy on multiple chains, right? Axelar being a blockchain, we have you can do programmability on top of the blockchain, where it's a hub where you can control multiple smart contracts on other chains itself. So those are some of the tooling that we help developers kind of build around to kind of address a lot of this building across multiple ecosystems.
Okay, thank you for your great answers. I think the time's up, so we'll just wrap up. Any questions, please ask us after our session. Thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.